Hello and welcome to our special program, Venezuela Decides 2025, in the framework of the beginning of a new mandate of President Nicolas Maduro. I'm your host, Alejandra Garcia, and I invite you to stay with us for all the details on this event of great significance, not just for Venezuela, but also for Latin America and the Global South. A new mandate opens, and with it, a project that aims to transform the state into a democratic one of the people, for the people, and with the people. Let's listen to the statements of President Nicolas Maduro on the matter as he urged for a constitutional reform.
I call on all sectors, economic, political, ideological, cultural, and social of the country, to hold a great day of inclusive and united dialogue, so that we can move forward together towards a great constitutional reform that will further democratize Venezuela.
And to go deep into the relevance of this event, I'm joined once again by Chris Gilbert, Professor of Political Studies at the Bolivarian University of Venezuela. Hello and welcome, Professor. Thank you for joining us once again.
Happy to be here.
Well, the current constitution of Venezuela is turning 25 years. Why is a reform called on this moment of the Bolivarian Revolution? And let's also mention that on our first special program, we discussed about the importance that the government is given to the communal spaces of the base of the society. Do you believe that this reform could be a step towards that direction?
For sure. In fact, Nicolas Maduro, President Maduro, said that that would be one of the important components of the reform. I mean, in a general sense, I think it's always important to update constitutions. In fact, I come originally from a country that has an very old constitution, and that's highly problematic because no one really understands it. In fact, there's a huge business of constitutional law that has to explain the Constitution to people and interpret it. So it ceases to be a document that's useful for people. And so the Bolivarian Constitution is 25 years old, but surely along the way one faces new challenges. I think one of the important challenges that's been faced, we can see actually in this recent electoral conjuncture. Basically what we saw was a lot of interference from the United States. They support a candidate. In the first place, they twist the arm of the people with sanctions, which is quite a lot like war. It's quite analogous with actually carrying out a war against the people of Venezuela, saying, we're going to go on twisting your arm until you vote for the person we like. And then another challenge is simply the old problems of the state, corruption, things like that. In fact, a big achievement of the revolution in the last couple of years was the fight against corruption, and specifically the neutralizing of Tarek al-Assami's corruption. So you can see how constitutional reform, and specifically a constitutional reform that puts emphasis on popular power, more democracy, more socialism, could be used to solve those two problems, to make a more democratic country, and the communes might be an important instrument in doing that.
And in this sense, what would this reform mean for the people, for the Venezuelan people, for the common people?
Well, I think that what it should mean is more power for the people, more democracy for the people. I think that many people have an ambiguous idea of the state. If you ask someone on the street, on the one hand, everyone wants the state to solve their problems. On the other hand, everyone has complaints about the state. And that actually corresponds to ideas in political philosophy. I mean, liberal philosophy has traditionally been against the state. And then you have the other side of the coin, Hegel, maybe the greatest political philosopher or greatest philosopher, or European philosopher of modernity, saying the state was the realization of the ethical idea. So basically the state is a highly contradictory phenomenon in capitalism. And I think the basic solution, which was proposed by Chavez, proposed in part through the Hungarian philosopher Istvan Mészáros, was to end the alienated state. And that sounds like fancy words, or end alienated institutionality. But everyone knows that institutions everywhere in the world, especially, well, in the capitalist world, institutions end up being separated from the people. People don't no longer control them. So the solution is to bring those institutions under popular control. And there's a long history of that in the Bolivarian process. You know, from even before the community councils, there were mesas técnicas de agua, and then the community councils, and then the communes. So there are all these instances of popular power that have actually been very successful when they've been employed. In fact, recently, we've seen 3 consultations in the communes. And those consultations, people can vote on problems. They propose those problems. You know, that's one important thing, because one problem with formal bourgeois democracy, representative democracy, is that people get to vote for things that they don't like. They usually have 2 options they don't like. And in these consultas, people can actually propose ideas, and their ideas get incorporated in the process. So I think there's been a hugely successful project of popular democracy, of going to the bases to solve problems. So that's why it's such a wise idea to go further into that, in that direction with the upcoming constitutional reform.
In his inauguration speech, the President Nicolas Maduro referred to the necessity that the country has of building a self-sustainable economic model. How can it be possible to fulfill from the communes?
Well, actually, sustainability is an important option. 2 things, you know, sustainability and diversity, because the Venezuelan economy for the last 100 years has been dominated by petroleum. Essentially, the international division of labor and capitalism determines that if your country sits upon huge petroleum reserves, that will be your role exclusively in the world economy. So that's been a huge problem in Venezuela for the past 100 years, is the increasing or the long-standing dependence on petroleum. And then, of course, sustainability, too, is another global issue. We've seen 1.5 degrees Celsius warming in this last year, which is a huge problem, perhaps one of the hugest problems facing humanity. So the communes actually offer an important possibility to overcome, to solve those 2 problems. In the case of diversifying the economy, one thing is communes mean planning. Planning, people can plan, decide how their production will go. In capitalism, people have to produce what's profitable, and here profit means petroleum. But in a controlled economy, in a planned economy like the communal one, you can decide what you're going to produce, and that can focus on humanly useful goods. In fact, everywhere in the world, especially in the global south, there's a need to achieve food sovereignty. And the communes have made important steps in that direction, but they could go further.
Precisely, these efforts of the Bolivarian government are resumed in the 7th Transformation Plan. Let's see what it is about.
In this regard, the first line of transformation focuses on the economy, seeking to modernize all the methods and techniques for the creation of national wealth that can lead to the consolidation of economic diversification to create a new export model. The second line of transformation is aimed at achieving full independence to update and expand the Bolivarian doctrine in its political, scientific, cultural, educational, and technological dimensions. The third transformation seeks peace, security, and territorial integrity to enhance the model of citizen coexistence, guarantee justice, protect human rights, and the safeguard of social and territorial peace, including the defense and development of the Guayana Esequiba. The fourth transformation focuses on the social sector. It seeks to totally modify the humanist protection model to accelerate the recovery of the welfare state, as well as its mission and great missions, and to strengthen the values of the Venezuelan socialism. In turn, the fifth transformation addresses the political aspect, which was included because it was considered essential to consolidate direct democracy with a republican ethic. Likewise, the sixth transformation aims to fight the climate crisis, raise awareness, and protect people from environmental threats, as well as the Amazon and the natural reserve of capitalism. The seventh and last transformation proposes the integration and leadership of Venezuela in the New World Order. Therefore, it seeks to rebuild Latin America and Caribbean integration and to strengthen the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The seventh transformation project was developed by all the social and economic sectors of the country with a detailed agenda for each one of the transformation, achieved through debates, analysis, and proposals.
As we could see, climate change was especially mentioned in the seventh transformation plan, and in this regard I wanted to ask you, what initiatives of the indigenous communities can be multiplied and serve as an inspiration for the country to tackle precisely in this effort to tackle climate change?
That's a very good question, especially in our context where there's an important indigenous population in Venezuela. And when you say can be multiplied, that's also an important aspect of it too. I recently had the chance to visit some indigenous communities in Amazonas state. And one fascinating thing, visiting Piroa people, is that when you ask them about socialism, they say, we live in socialism. And that's actually scientifically very correct, because if socialism means prioritizing use values, control of your own economy, planning, democracy, they actually do live in socialism. Typically, though, they ask for support from the state, and they look for, they want to actually, something that we would call increasing productive forces, increasing their productive capacity. Some of them have recently received solar panels, which is very useful in their context. So one thing, they are extremely, for example, Piroa people are they live extremely sustainable fashion. The production is totally integrated in their lives, and they plan what they're going to do. But there is an issue about multiplication, because when you certain techniques that they use if they were multiplied, they would not actually be environmental. For example, they use slash and burn agriculture. So if we had 26 million people practicing slash and burn agriculture, that wouldn't be so successful. But the most important legacy of the indigenous, or legacy is not the right way of putting it, the most important thing we can learn from indigenous people is precisely the socialist aspect of what they do. Because they do plan, they actually prioritize use values in what they do, and that can be multiplied. So that's actually the important legacy that should be replicated in a socialist project.
You mentioned the consultative process that Venezuela has been taking. It has been taking place in Venezuela for the past years. What importance do you give to this process of popular consultations regarding their self-sufficient, their self-determination of what funds they need to what aspects, like what's the importance of this?
Well, the consultation is an important thing. As I was saying, it's a little bit like, the Chinese developed a practice called the mass line. It was developed under Maoism, and Xi Jinping has revived under Xi Jinping's presidency. It's been revived. And that's a form of consultation. You go to the people and you collect their ideas. And the consultations do that. The other thing that's important about the consultations is they represent a validation of the commune. So communes exist, but often in a community there will be different degrees of participation. And when the government decides to do a consultation process, that's a way of saying the commune exists and people begin to participate more fully. So the commune becomes more real in that sense. I do think that while the consultations are extremely important and they are useful for allocating resources and they incentivize participation in the communes, it's also important to realize that the communes actually do represent something much more ambitious. And one way of thinking about that is that in any political process, any process of revolutionary change, you need to have places where people can experience a new sociality. They can experience a solidarious way of being. Because in the capitalist world we live, that's precisely what's negated. So I think the communes provide a kind of school, a kind of nucleus where people can develop that praxis in which they will evolve as more revolutionary communities and people, as more revolutionary individuals.
We are on the first day of the new mandate of President Nicolas Maduro, and the people are still on the streets enjoying, celebrating this moment. Do you think that this is also as well for all the strategy that the government has been applying to provide of more authenticity, of more self-dependence of the communes, of the people, of the base of the society?
Absolutely. I believe we live in a very exciting moment in Venezuela. Certainly we've been through difficult times. I mean, initially through the sanctions, and there has been a process of recovery. It's still a long way to go. And then I think the most important thing that's happened even in the past 2 years is that while a big achievement of Maduro's government has been overcoming the sanctions, facing the sanctions, I think in the last 2 years the most important achievement is the attempt to recover the socialist project, and to do that precisely by going once more to the people. I think that's one of the most important legacies of Chavez. You know, Chavez realized that faced with imperialism, the only real power or the only real way to confront imperialism is going to the people with more democracy and more socialism.
Communes or nothing, he said.
Exactly. And nothing, what do we have in nothing? I mean, that's actually a profound statement. The statement actually is an echo of one of Bolivar's slogans. There's a little known slogan of Bolivar in which Bolivar said, "Independencia o nada," independence or nothing. So in a sense, commune or nothing is also an anti-imperialist slogan. I think it's also, you could say, faced with the nothing of climatic destruction, of environmental destruction, that's another thing that's on the other side of nothing. So when one affirms communes, one is affirming life in the face of the destructive capitalist tendencies, but one's also affirming the nation, the people faced with imperialism.
The government is also trying to improve or reivindicate the minorities of the countries, the farmers, the women, also the indigenous communities. Why is there a need of putting the people at the center of the country's political participation and political decision making?
Sure, one important thing about that is that quite often people think of the working class, unfortunately, because of Eurocentric tendencies, even because of errors that the left made, they often imagine a white man in overalls. And that's actually not the real nature of the working class. The real working class is often indigenous people, peasants, that's an important part of the working class, women, gender diverse people, that's also the working class. And the other thing that's extremely important is that capitalism always tries to divide the working class. You know, in recent years, there have been these interesting conceptions like racialized capitalism or patriarchal capitalism. And those terms, what they indicate is the way capitalism always tries to divide the working class. It always seeks to pit one sector against another. And so there's always a need in any revolutionary process to take the most oppressed sector and give it extra support as a way of overcoming those divisions that are introduced among the people. So that's one important thing. That's a way of incorporating all sectors into a unified project, only through equity, only by giving increased support to those who have historically been oppressed.
Thank you very much, Professor Chris, for joining us once more and debating on these remarkable events that are taking place in Venezuela. As the President said, Venezuela is making history. Thank you for being part of this analysis.
Thank you. It's absolutely correct that we live in an extremely important historical moment. And I think there's a lot of hope in Venezuela. I certainly have a lot of hope. And I think that we can look to the future with a great deal of ambition and confidence.
Thank you. And now we're going to take a short break, but don't go away. In a few moments, we'll be joined by another special guest to keep analyzing on this paramount event for the Venezuelan people. Now some images of how the celebrations are going in the capital of Caracas.
Con esto me retiro, familia, los quiero. Yo soy Daniel P. Ok, bailando todos como ahorita, bailando. Dice. Dime si quieres venirte y de una corro a buscarte. Tienes lo que necesito. En tu peso ya quiero darme. Que soy un loco, mami, lo sé. Por ti lo malo lo dejaré. Que me alcance la vida para cuidarte. Te juro, nena, no fallaré. Yeah.
Welcome back to Venezuela Decides 2025 presidential inauguration. The Bolivarian process has been driven by two key pillars. Let's begin saying this. One aimed at empowering the people's power within the country, and the other focused on establishing cooperative mechanisms and alliances with progressive governments and the Global South. Let's see the following material on this topic.
In this regard, Venezuela and China signed 31 new agreements to increase bilateral cooperation to the highest level. 10 of these agreements will address priority areas such as economy, geology, technology transfer in the areas of health, mining, housing, electric power, and telecommunications. 18 other agreements focus on strategy areas that both nations intend to expand, such as politics, economy, trade, education, science and technology, aerospace, and communication. In this strategic line, Venezuela and Russia have signed over 340 agreements covering areas such as energy, tourism, industry, agriculture, and technological cooperation. This figure reflects the depth and dynamism of relation between the two countries. Caracas and Moscow propose to create new payment models in the national currency ruble bolivar as new funding sources. In Latin America, trade between Venezuela and Colombia increased by almost 800% since the reestablishment of bilateral relations. From January 2023 to August 2024, binational trade continues to grow, and it has a rate of 56% in the first 8 months of the year 2024, and the figures could exceed $1 billion. Regarding regional unity, the ALBA TCP member countries approved in Caracas a special declaration on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the integration mechanism. President Nicolas Maduro highlighted in the document the ratification of the commitment to defend the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, which, 10 years after its approval at the second CELAC summit in Havana, Cuba in January 2014, remains in full force and effect. In the international sphere, President Nicolas Maduro has stressed the importance of consolidating Venezuela's definite accession to the BRICS, emphasizing that the great South-South homeland is being reborn and its admission as a partner of the integration mechanism could be considered a first step. Regarding the strengthening of the energy sector, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEP, highlights Venezuela's historical commitment and its actions to preserve the stability of the oil market. Nations such as Algeria, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iran, and Saudi Arabia deepening their agendas with Caracas and strengthening their efforts for the production of hydrocarbons.
And in this context, we invite to our studio Sam McGill, member of the Revolutionary Communist Group from Great Britain. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for welcoming us here.
We could see in the past few days that Venezuela is not alone. Despite the intentions of the far right and all the emporiums and the mainstream medias trying to isolate Venezuela from the rest of the world, that all the opposite has happened. Not just the Venezuelan people took to the streets, but also millions of sympathizers traveled to Venezuela to accompany President Nicolas Maduro in his swearing-in ceremony. There were also official delegations from some countries that we just mentioned in the material. In your opinion, what's the importance of this international support, not just by official delegations, but also from people that is been very attentive of what is happening in Venezuela?
Yeah, I think it has been absolutely crucial that in these recent months, since September, with the opening of the anti-fascist meetings, the reunions, the Internationale, the youth and students meeting that happened in November, the parliamentary sessions that happened, and now with this anti-fascist festival that has happened over the days of the inauguration of Maduro, thousands of young people, thousands of people from over 100 different countries have come to Venezuela, and they've come to Venezuela to see the reality of Venezuela. Some people that I've spoke to didn't know very much about Venezuela before, and they're here to learn, and it is so inspiring that they are learning so many things about the reality of Venezuela, about some of the really progressive policies and programs that Venezuela has implemented, that the Bolivarian Revolution has implemented. We visited comunas, we visited women's organizations, we were in the streets with thousands of Venezuelans All of this is really important because those people will then go back to their countries and they will tell people what the reality is, what Venezuela's reality is. So when they are encountering people in their movements or people on the streets or their media saying, oh, Venezuela is a dictatorship, there's no democracy, the people don't support Maduro, they have seen with their own eyes the truth, so they can challenge that. And of course, the people who have come back to Venezuela to participate in these congresses, it also helps to strengthen the relationships between so many different countries. It's been fantastic to be in the Congress on Thursday and today and see the multitude of different flags that are there, Not only Latin America, obviously it's very important to have the Latin America regional representation. However, also the flags from the Caribbean, also the flags from the African Sahel states. We met comrades from Niger, comrades from Burkina Faso, comrades from Mali. This is also a really important pole that is developing, this new anti-imperialist pole that is developing in West Africa with the Alliance of Sahel States. It's really important that this is recognized, and the solidarity and the trade and the connections are already developing between Venezuela and the countries of ALBA and this new anti-imperialist pole in West Africa. And of course, the participation from people from Britain, from the US, from Canada, the very countries that are sanctioning Venezuela, the very countries that are driving the imperialist agenda to try and destabilize Venezuela, to try and overthrow Nicolas Maduro, to try and get rid and crush the Bolivarian revolution. It's very important that the people who are in solidarity with Venezuela from these imperialist countries, from these heartlands, can attend Venezuela and go back and build solidarity and really fight from inside the stomach of the monster, as we call it.
Despite the attempts of the far right of calling for violence, of this misinformation campaign that Venezuela has been a target of, nothing prevents the people from taking the streets and become this ceremony into a great joy event of people, of popular unity, of music and dancing. And I want to know your personal experience and how did you live these past days, feeling all these emotions?
I mean, for me, the focus has to be yesterday. We were on the streets of Caracas. We were outside Miraflores Palace. It was full. I mean, there were 30,000 people that I've been told, maybe even more, from Caracas who were there in the streets. We were able to walk around. We were interviewing ordinary Venezuelans who were there to support their president, who were there to support their Bolivarian revolutionary process. And the energy was just amazing. And it really is important that we, as people from Britain, from the US, from these countries, as I mentioned, that are driving the agenda against Venezuela, that we document the people on the streets and that we show it in our social media, that we show the people when we get back to our countries. Because if you look at the pages of The Guardian, this is the British newspaper that calls itself the world's leading liberal voice, yeah? They are full of lies about Venezuela, lies and manipulation. For example, there was an article a few days ago saying that Corina Machado had been kidnapped, allies say. They're always very careful to quote people, but, the headline takeaway is that she's been kidnapped. Of course, this came out as false news. The next day, the article about the inauguration was that it was sparsely attended. They're talking about, the diplomatic attendance at the National Assembly, which actually, by the way, there were many diplomats from many different countries there, including the presidents of Nicaragua and Cuba. But they were talking just about the National Assembly. They did not say a single word about the 30,000 people in the streets who also took the oath, and we were there with them. We took the oath alongside Maduro, and people were singing, people were dancing, and everybody who we were speaking to was telling us, yes, Maduro is my president. I voted for Maduro. My vote must be respected. I support Maduro because of what he's doing with the communes. He's giving us participatory protagonistic democracy. I support Maduro because, due to the great housing mission of Venezuela that has provided more than 5 million units of social housing, I have a house. I support Venezuela because, you know, every week I'm able to access food. You know, we are receiving the clap bags several times a month. You know, people were telling us their experience as women, their experience as children. There were children on the streets shouting, "Vamos, Nico." I said, why do you support Nicolas Maduro? And they're saying, he's my president. Because of him, you know, I have a future in my education. I can go to university if I want to. So I think it's really important to be out on the streets with people, to share that sense of participation, to share that sense that this movement does not belong to one person. It does not belong to Nicolas Maduro. And he is the first person that says that. Precisely. He's saying that this is the people's revolutionary process. This is the people's Bolivarian revolutionary movement. And the National Assembly, the swearing in that happened yesterday, belongs to the Chavista people. And yesterday, Caracas belonged to the Chavista people. And although I wasn't there, I've seen the photographs of people mobilizing on the streets in all of the cities around Venezuela. This wasn't just about Caracas. There were hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Venezuela yesterday supporting the inauguration of Nicolas Maduro. And so when papers like The Guardian say, you know, that Maduro has lost the streets, or that the inauguration was sparsely populated, they are making those people invisible. They are ignoring huge sections of Venezuelan society like they don't mean anything to the media in our country. So it's important for us to fight the media war against Venezuela. This is our, you know, number one focus, and we regularly have protests outside of The Guardian. We're having one on the 15th in London this month, in a few days' time, because we have to challenge their lies. You know, we know the lies of the right-wing media, but the problem is that The Guardian poses as a left voice. It poses as a liberal voice. And so it creates so much confusion amongst the people, you know, people who consider themselves as left or consider themselves as, you know, socially conscientious. It creates all this confusion. So this is why we have to challenge these newspapers, these media outlets, and we have to fight the media war. It is part of fighting the blockade against Venezuela, is fighting the media war.
Precisely. Progressive movements are seeing this inauguration as a defeat for the US intentions and its allies' intentions, including the UK, to interfere in the internal affairs of Venezuela. Today, Venezuela is standing as an independent nation. However, the US insists in applying unilateral sanctions. Precisely, yesterday they announced a couple of more sanctions that are joined to a huge list of over 900 unilateral sanctions. In your opinion, what are the real interests behind these persistent attempts against the democratic path of Venezuela?
Yeah. And if we talk about sanctions, we have to talk about the British sanctions against Venezuela. They have also sanctioned 15 people. And this adds to a list of now 51 people who are sanctioned by the British government. But more than that, they continue to steal the gold of Venezuela. You know, there is $1.4 billion worth of gold, like hidden, stolen, hoarded in the coffers of the Bank of England. And they have refused to give back that gold. And you know, they are working hand in glove with the US and with the European Union to implement these sanctions against Venezuela. It is part of a strategy that we have seen since the coup against Chile, Allende in Chile, and obviously, you know, throughout the history of the Cuban Revolution, sanctions, economic war. This all comprises a blockade, and this blockade, it is designed to make the economy scream. And they did it in Chile. They've been doing it in Cuba. They're doing it in Venezuela. And I think it's about a couple of, I think the intentions behind it is a couple of things. Obviously, there is the oil of Venezuela. And yes, Venezuela has a lot of oil, and the US wants it. Trump even said himself, if he had, if he was in power, if Biden didn't take the presidency in the US, we would have already got Venezuela's gold. I mean, that's what he said, yeah? Venezuela's oil. That's what he said. They were after the oil. However, I think it runs deeper than that, because I think Venezuela is a threat of a good example. Yes, it is an extraordinary and unusual threat, a threat of a good example, a threat that a different world can be built, a different world can be possible. They are implementing socialist policies that are uplifting people who have been excluded for decades and decades and decades. And the Bolivarian Revolution, the 25 years that it has existed, there are so many examples of how the poor people, the working class people, the women, the children, healthcare, education, all of these things become seen as human rights. And that is made possible by by the Bolivarian Revolution and this threat of a good example. The other aspect is that Venezuela is playing a role as a leading anti-imperialist force in Latin America. We have the designation of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela as the troika of tyranny. And this was, a few years ago under the Trump administration, and clearly Biden has continued with this. And Britain and the EU they are marching in lockstep with this analysis. And why are they the troika of tyranny? They are the troika of tyranny to the US because they pose this anti-imperialist threat against the US hegemony of, and imperialist power. They pose a threat against British imperialism, against EU imperialism, and because they are mobilizing with the global South. They are organizing South-South trade. They are organizing systems like CELAC, like ALBA, which are built on mutual support, mutual development, on principles of supporting their region to organize the infrastructure in a different way, to develop trade in a different way, so that the focus of this project becomes it becomes people instead of profit, and this is what they are. This is what they are fighting against.
Thank you very much, Sam, for joining us today. Thank you. We are very pleased to have you here and also to analyze on all these events so paramount, and not just for the region, as you mentioned, but also for the world and also for the left of the world. And as you mentioned, Venezuela has become the epicenter of the struggle of the left movement worldwide. And thank you very much for your remarks on this day.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. We were joined by Sam McGill, a member of the Revolutionary Communist Group of Great Britain. And with that, we conclude with this special program, Venezuela Decides 2025, marking the start of a new era for the Bolivarian Revolution, with President Maduro leading the way. This new era that promises greater transformations, political consensus, and peace achieved by the people, for the people, and with the people. I'm your host, Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.